Dear participants, welcome back. Let us now begin the first session, titled Vision for a Shared Future, Lessons from the Past and the Road Forward. For the past 25 years, trilateral cooperation has steadily expanded and strengthened despite regional and global crises. Given these achievements, the 25th anniversary is the appropriate time to review the accomplishments and the challenges of trilateral cooperation and look ahead the way forward. In this context, this session will discuss the future of trilateral cooperation and also reflect on its achievements of 25 years. Kindly note that online guests may also submit questions to the speakers through the chat function. And now, without further ado, please welcome Mr. Li Kaisheng, Vice President of the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, to moderate the session. Mr. Li, the floor is yours.
好，谢谢。我是来自上海。
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Li Kaisheng from the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. It's a great honor for me to be moderating this first session. As you know well, this year is the 25th anniversary of the beginning of the trilateral cooperation in the form of the TCS. And so we have a 25-year history of engaging in trilateral exchanges. When couples get married, they say that by year 25, there's a high rate of divorce. And what this means is that in a marriage, yes, it does mean something. Being married for 25 years has special significance. So once again, we are at this critical point of 25 years anniversary. Compared to other regions, the trilateral cooperation among Korea, China, and Japan is actually not very active. Particularly here in Northeast Asia, there are historical, political complications that continue to exist. And so these kinds of cooperative mechanism, the fact that we have maintained this for the past quarter of a century, of course, is very meaningful. It has not been an easy path. And we say that 25 years of marriage, you celebrate the silver anniversary. So we are celebrating silver anniversary in our relationship as well. We have experts from the three countries as well as from the Netherlands who will be engaging in a discussion on our shared future vision. And so now I'd like to briefly introduce to you our speakers and discussants. First, from Korea, we have Cho Yang-hyun, Director of the Center for Japanese Studies at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. He is the first speaker. The second speaker is from Japan. He is Miyake Kunihiko, Special Advisor to the Cabinet of Prime Minister Kishida, Office of the Prime Minister. The third speaker is the former Chinese ambassador to Korea, Ning Fu-kui. Welcome. And our discussant is the ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands to Korea, Peter van der Vliet. So I'd like to welcome all of you. We have three speakers and one discussant once again in this session. And we will be focusing on 3 points for our discussion: history, during the past 25 years, and during the past 13 years since TCS was established, what were the lessons that we have gained, as well as important milestones that we have crossed in our relationship, and also the strengthening of TCS. That is another topic to discuss, how we can build capacity of TCS further. And at the Trilateral Summit, this was already discussed. Which is how can we build stronger capacity for TCS. And also recently, at the Trilateral Summit, there was also discussions about how to improve trilateral relationship in all different areas. And so with the speakers and the discussants, we will be engaging in this exchange of ideas on these topics that I have outlined so far. I will be giving each speaker 10 minutes to share your ideas, after which After the three speaker statements, our discussants will also be giving the discussion for 10 minutes as well. And then after the four speakers have spoken, there will be a discussion and Q&A with the floor. And as the moderator of this session, I will be asking questions to our speakers and discussants as well later on. And also, we are having this online and offline hybrid meeting. And so you can submit your questions through online. And if time permits, we're going to try to address those questions that we have received, both from the floor and through online. So I'd like to now ask the Korean speaker, Director Cho Yang-hyun, for your presentation for 10 minutes. So I will be giving you a signal for the time. Thank you.
让我们大家掌声欢迎。
Please give him a big round of applause.
네, 방금 소개.
Yes, I've just been introduced. My name is Cho Yang-hyun. Today, I would like to provide a short talk on the topic of a proposal on furthering the trilateral cooperation. In Fukuoka in 2008, Trilateral dialogue was first launched, and since then I have engaged in research on trilateral cooperation. And today, I find it a great honor to have given this opportunity to speak to you about the research that I have done. I would like to thank our hosts. I have three proposals that I would like to talk about. The first is on the significance and meaning of our trilateral cooperation, and secondly, the tasks that we need to engage in to accomplish institutionalization, and the third is on the direction forward on making our institutionalization more robust. The first is on the meaning and significance of our trilateral cooperation. Just 30 years ago, East Asia was suffering from what we call stunted regionalism. If we look to the EU or if we look at NAFTA, compared to these vehicles, Northeast Asia did not have a lot of commitment for regional integration. The level was quite low. This idea of regionalism, which is based on the transfer of national sovereignty, on creating an ultra-nationalist, supranationalist bloc, in terms of that focus, I can say that we are still taking baby steps. However, if we can take a broader definition of regionalism, so if we can look at it from the point of view of simple cooperation with regional countries for furthering our region, then I can say that at least in that regard, cooperation is quite vibrant in this sphere. Particularly in Northeast Asia, there are many different kinds of regional levels of dialogue, so it's a multi-layered regionalism that you can see here. There are multiple different kinds of collaborative fora and channels that have developed. For example, there is ASEAN in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. There is trilateral cooperation among Korea, China, and Japan. Over the past 25 years, trilateral cooperation has really accelerated. And in 1999, back then, there were only 2 ministerial vehicles, but now there are 21 ministerial-level collaborative channels and over 70 different kinds of government-level public channels. And there's also much dialogue and exchange among regional local governments and private sector and researchers as well. This has contributed significantly to serving as a buffer to decreasing the level of political and social tension among the three countries. In that regard, the Trilateral Summit, which was held last month, allowed the three heads of state to say that trilateral cooperation has become deepened in many different walks of life, benefiting our peoples and becoming a significant platform for regional cooperation. And I do think that this level of review is valid. Secondly, what must we do to further institutionalization of trilateral cooperation? Of course, there are these positive reviews, like the reviews shown by the heads of states last month, but we have the summit and the TCS Secretariat, which was established in 2012. So there are these positive outcomes that led to what many can argue institutionalization. But if we look at the history of summits over the past 25 years, I don't think that we are on completely stable footing. After 2008, the three heads of state have said many times that they are hoping to have regular annual summits. But in 2003, 2004, 2006, 2007, there were historical strife and territorial issues, and this has led to a discontinuation of the summits.
20년 들어와서도 코로나
In 2020, we had the COVID pandemic and deepening conflict between the U.S. and China with the trade war, so we did not have the summit for about 4 years. There was territorial strife, racial and ideological hegemonic strife. Despite all of these, ASEAN was still able to have consistent regular summits every year for about 50 years. So this is a stark contrast. If we move on to the third issue that I would like to talk about is what must we do to promote institutionalization of trilateral cooperation. I want to propose two things. The first is we must absolutely have a high level, a presidential level of summits every year without fail. There have been many ways that have been presented to try to decrease tension among the three countries. Cooperative vision and sharing a common identity and trying to issue a sort of moratorium, declare one on history and territorial issues, and also try to separate policy outcomes from political matters. However, if we look at the past, we have seen that none of these suggestions were actually realistic. So I think once again we have to turn to ASEAN. Even if there are issues for conflict and tension, we should nevertheless continue to engage in multilateral cooperation in spite of those issues. This is also a way to institutionalize trilateral cooperation, putting it in document form on institutionalizing the summit. I do think that it was great progress made in the past summit that the three heads of state agreed to this regular holding of the summits. But if we can document it and have it in written form, host the summits every year in the first half of the year, then it would be helpful. There are many international conferences and summits held in the second half of the year, so if we can host it and commit to hosting it in the first half of the year, then I do think that it will be more realistic. And thus far, we have seen it practiced that China did not send their president. However, instead of the prime minister, I think having the president of China participate in the summit would allow for a so-called leveling up of the summit. Second proposal that I would like to make is to enhance the capacity of TCS. As former Minister Kim Sung-hwan has mentioned in his keynote speech, I do think this is a very important task. In Southeast Asia, ASEAN was able to maintain and strengthen regional cooperation because of the ASEAN Secretariat. The ASEAN Secretariat played an immense role. In Northeast Asia, we had a low level of institutionalization, and yet we were able to establish TCS. I think this was remarkable progress. And yet, it is the foreign ministries of the three countries that have the policy influence. So if the TCS can be like a control tower, they need to have more control, more budget, and also more HR control as well. Just like ASEAN, TCS could function as a preparatory agency for the summit. And for that, it needs to be equipped with a relevant authority. For ASEAN, there are 300 to 400 meetings or so across the dozen or so ASEAN countries, and the ASEAN Secretariat is responsible for coordinating them. For the three countries, There's the foreign ministers, the ministerial level, the director general level meetings, and of course the Trilateral Summit. These events and the conferences are all separately coordinated and separately run by the relevant ministries. So if this can be, the authority for hosting and coordinating all of this can be given to the TCS, and if TCS can also be given the authority to manage the different projects among the three countries, that would be very helpful. Furthermore, it is important for the TCS as a secretariat to participate in issues like cyber terrorism, disaster, terrorism, nuclear safety. In those function-specific areas, TCS participation should be further expanded. At the 7th summit in 2018, the three countries' foreign ministries agreed to more discussions, and TCS should participate in these as well. And TCS should participate as an observer in other regional bloc meetings such as APEC and etc. And also, we need to secure the fiscal stability of TCS. In 2019, at the summit there, we were able to reaffirm once again the role that TCS can play. And I think that TCS can go a long way to also contribute more with the TCF, or the Trilateral Cooperation Fund. Furthermore, the Secretariat's term should also be increased from the current 2 years to the 4-year term. TCS, some of the authority, of course, might be difficult to be transferred over from the foreign ministry, and in that transition process, there will inevitably be some bumps on the road. But if we look at ASEAN, we have to take a long-term approach. I do think that for the purposes of institutionalizing trilateral cooperation, to have TCS take up more of that influence and take up more of that control would be very important. Thank you for your attention.
好，谢谢曹主任的这个精彩发言。他对
Thank you very much. The regularization of Trilateral Summit and the capacity building of TCS were some of the points that were made. Again, please be reminded that you have 10 minutes. Next, I'd like to invite from Japan, Miyake Kunihiko, Special Advisor to the Cabinet of the Prime Minister, for his statement. Please give him a warm hand.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here, to be honest. And first of all, I'd like to thank the TCS Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat for inviting me today. You may regret, but later you will appreciate. Today, I was a bit embarrassed because every speaker speaks his or her native language, but I decided not to do that because I want you to listen to me without using interpretation, because I have some messages. So if you understand English, please remove your earphone and please listen to me carefully. I like to do that directly to you. Thank you. That said, I am a serious, no-nonsense former Middle East hand in the Japanese Foreign Service. So therefore, I have no intention to give a time-wasting propagandish ceremonial speech. Or I have no intention to make a proposal without substances. After turning 70 years old last year, I have nothing to worry about. I'm not afraid of anything. So I tell you what I want to tell you. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Trilateral Cooperation. And 25 years ago, in 1999, I was director at the North America Bureau of the Foreign Ministry, in charge of the Japan-US Security Treaty Affairs. I witnessed President Kim Dae-jun's visit to Japan, and I listened to his speech in the Japanese parliament. It was a moving, really moving speech. And I was also in Beijing when President Hu Jintao took office in 2002. So I was in Beijing. So at that time, I was very, very optimistic about the future of our trilateral cooperation. But unfortunately, since then, our relationship have fluctuated widely like an oscilloscope. Of course, many of these fluctuations happen for some political reasons, you may all know. The opening ceremony of the TCS was held probably somewhere in this neighborhood, September 27th, 2011. And I like to, again, express my utmost respect for the TCS, which in the past 13 years have planned and implemented various meaningful projects, sometimes patiently, sometimes boldly, trying to overcome many difficulties. And the first Secretary General of TCS, here present, distinguished Secretary General, ambitiously said at that time, do you remember? He said, I hope that the TCS will grow into a powerful international organization like the EU or ASEAN. I fully agree. But while the EU is a homogeneous grouping of more than 20 European Christian nations, ASEAN, on the other hand, is a diverse international body that has been carefully, patiently maintained for the sake of long-term confidence building among the region's various, no major, I shouldn't have said that, well, not major powers, because there's no participation by the major powers. It was manageable. ASEAN is an organization whose very existence itself has great significance. In comparison, the TCS is different from either of the two. But perhaps it is closer to ASEAN in that the existence itself is meaningful, very meaningful. When it comes to TCS, I wish to make 3 important points today. I still have 5 minutes, so I can finish it. The first is the importance of its existence. To exist anywhere, we should continue to exist. Because if you lose it, we have nothing. In other words, continuity is in a narrow sense. The TCS has been aimed at building confidence among our 3 nations, and I believe that this purpose has been well served. Thanks to all of you. The second and a greater challenge is to maintain continuity in a broader sense. That is, to continue constant activities year after year without interruption and to produce specific results. The biggest obstacle was that issues were often politicized, with regional disputes introduced or involved. In addition, since the consensus among the 3 nations had been so emphasized, that we tend to have similar agendas repeatedly year after year. That's probably a natural thing to happen. In this sense, while the second point seems to contradict with the first, in fact, those 2 points I made are 2 sides of the same coin. Thirdly, and finally, I wish to point out the importance of innovation or transformation. Now that the trilateral cooperation has reached the 25-year mark, the TCS may be standing at the new juncture in history. there's a trade-off because of the small number of participants. We have only 3 participants. 3 is a very stable number because it's a triangle. Triangle is so stable, but it will not. But sometimes it is so stable that often inwardly closed and does not expand outwardly. So that's the characteristics of the triangle. While maintaining the basic framework of cooperation among the 3, we may now have to consider increasing the scope of both participants and activities from now on. Rather than trying to complete the TCS with only 3 nations, it might be a good idea to expand the activities of the TCS in a more innovative manner with such concepts like a 3+1 or 3+X. In this context, I believe that the 3+ Mongolia idea, which was discussed at the recent tripartite summit meeting held in here, this could be a breakthrough. Finally, going forward, it may be necessary to retain the good aspect of confidence building while pursuing new innovations for its activities. In particular, I wish to commend the Dr. Zhou, the Korean friend, whose proposal to further strengthen the Secretariat's authority, realigning its authority and giving it more unique identity. I believe these are all worthy of listening ears. Thank you so much.
好，谢谢公家包彦先生啊，这个非常准时。
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sticking to your time limit and for giving an excellent sharing of ideas. Thank you very much once again. So you also gave very good proposals. Thank you for that as well. Next, we'd like to invite former Chinese ambassador to Korea, Ning Fu-kui. You have 10 minutes.
I am very pleased to have this opportunity to participate in this forum and to speak about the future of the trilateral cooperation. The 9th summit was held recently in Seoul, and I believe that the successful hosting of the summit showed that trilateral cooperation is once again seen to be a very significant agenda for the heads of state. The joint declaration was announced, and there were practical and concrete commitments that were included in this document. There was a clear positive signal that the 3 countries will engage in further cooperation down the road. Many countries around the world, particularly in ASEAN, were very much looking forward and anticipating the summit, and also in all of our countries. And as Prime Minister Li Keqiang has said, this summit came on the heels of 4 years of discontinuation. And in doing so, it has opened up a new chapter for trilateral cooperation, and that this new summit would open up the way for us to usher in a new future. It's a great blueprint. The 3 countries are close neighbors, physical proximity, and also in terms of our population and our influence around the world. The 3 countries have a lot to do to contribute to peace, prosperity, and economic growth for the region and the world at large. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the start of trilateral cooperation. Our 3 countries, our level of cooperation is truly accelerating. And in 2008, I was deeply impressed because that year the first summit was held in Fukuoka in Japan. And then there was a joint declaration that was announced for a joint partnership, a comprehensive partnership among the 3 countries where we established clear principles for the way forward. And that was how the Solo Summit became an institution. In responding to the global financial crisis, the three countries also shared a common understanding. So there was also a joint declaration on global finance and the economy. I remember I was in Korea at the time, serving as an ambassador for my country. And I remember at the time being very personally pleased about this level of deepening of trilateral cooperation. In a very short period of time, our three countries were able to foster these deep ties of cooperation. Especially when bilateral relations are quite positive, we were able to achieve much accomplishments, person-to-person exchanges, mutual trust, and also mutual understanding. I believe that these tasks, these missions were great, but there are still many left ahead of us. I believe we need to foster more trust. There needs to be mutual trust so that we can engage in more accomplishments in the future and have more developments in our trilateral cooperation. Over the past 4 years, we've seen how much the world has changed. International politics, regional and geopolitical tensions. We've seen so much massive changes across the world at large. And these are bringing many challenges to all of us. However, because we are facing these complex challenges ahead of us, the three countries of Korea, China, and Japan are only so much realizing that there are things that remain constant. And there are four constants that I would like to emphasize. The first is that all three countries are pursuing cooperation, reciprocity, and shared growth. Our people's aspirations for those have not changed. And the second constant is that we remain neighbors. We remain very close geographical neighbors, and that will never change. And thirdly, the constant is that we have gone through these Asian financial crises and COVID, that we have engaged together in a spirit of cooperation through those crises. And the fourth constant is that our responsibility to maintain regional stability continues to be a constant. This means that the three countries have to work together to build common prosperity despite these complex challenges. The TCS is an important outcome of our institutionalization. Over the past 13 years or so, the Secretariat has worked very actively, participating in the collaborative mechanisms for the three countries, providing much support and also spearheading many relevant projects. The TCS is really showing their prowess and their impact in many of these regards. Last year, I had the opportunity to participate in TCS events. Some of them were youth-related. And according to the 9th Summit Joint Declaration, the three countries have agreed to focus more on 6 areas for further cooperation. These commitments, these promises made by our heads of state are those tasks that we must continue to carry forward with and work to implement. In that regard, I believe that we have to provide more support for institutionalization. There are 21 ministerial meetings and over 70 or so governmental collaborative mechanisms across our three countries. Going forward, there might be even more than these, but TCS is working in education, tourism, agriculture, many of these different regions, many of these different sectors, such as green growth, green development. Perhaps the TCS should also work to build their capacity on these areas as well. And the three countries should also work to try to emphasize cooperation in some lesser looked, marginalized areas of cooperation. And TCS can provide that support. 2025 and 2026 were designated as years of cultural exchange among the three countries, and we have agreed to increase the level of people-to-people exchange to 30,000 going forward. There is also plans to increase the number of students participating in the Asian campus from 15K to 30K. These goals, these outcomes are those that are realistic in scope. Of course, this is not to say that the challenge is not there. This will be difficult to achieve, but it is a realistic target. And so, in that regard, we have to continue to engage in many different exchanges, particularly youth exchange. Furthermore, there needs to be more work on economy and trade, trying to identify more areas for economic cooperation. There are some efforts to try to dismantle and break up the Northeast Asian region. However, we have the internal engine within ourselves and the internal drive to have more integration. The supply chain, digital transformation, and AI-related coordination are those areas that need to be more fostered, and there needs to be ministerial meeting in the field of science and technology. The fourth is that we have to see more roles of the TCS in expanding the summit. The TCS plays an important role, and it has shown that it has played an important role in the past, but in the future it can play other key roles, for example, as a digital hub or as the secretariat for other areas that the three countries are working on together. And the TCS can help to raise awareness across our countries and our peoples and contribute to raising mutual awareness. I believe that TCS can continue to work in this regard, and I hope that it will do so. Lastly, I would like to end by thanking TCS for inviting me to this forum and giving me this opportunity to speak here. I wish for the success of IFTC.
林大使。
Thank you very much. So we've listened to the three speakers from Korea, Japan, and China respectively share their ideas with regards to regional cooperation. So the three countries seem to be playing very important roles in promoting regional cooperation. Next, I'd like to ask our discussant to speak. He is from Europe. He is the ambassador of the Netherlands to Korea, Peter van der Vliet. So since you are a discussant, please try to give your ideas on the three speakers who spoke earlier. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, moderator Li Kai-shang, also for moderating this debate. I would like to really thank the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat for inviting me to this important and timely international forum. I have listened with great interest to the contributions by the panel speakers, Director Professor Zhou, Special Advisor Miyake-san, and Ambassador Ning. Lots of suggestions. So you might wonder, what is the ambassador of the Netherlands doing in this, on this panel? Because I am clearly the outsider here. I'm the only one who is not from China, South Korea, or Japan. Some of you might think, is he here to submit the application of the Netherlands to become a member of the Trilateral Cooperation, or the application of the European Union? That is not the case, although it does sound rather tempting. And I really like the suggestion also by Special Advisor Miyake-san in his introduction, where he stressed as one of his points trilateral cooperation plus X. And X could of course be Mongolia, X could be ASEAN, those are the obvious candidates, but X could also be, for example, the European Union. Because there's a world out there beyond the three countries. And I think some of the issues that we are tackling are global issues. Climate change, health challenges. So I think it's an excellent suggestion to try to reach out also beyond the region for cooperation. But let me backtrack a little bit. The organizers asked me to make some remarks based on the history of the cooperation within the European Union. So I will do so. For an open economy and a relatively small country like the Netherlands, the European Union is of critical importance. We are dependent on the European Union for our prosperity, to be able to negotiate trade agreements with countries that are much bigger than us, to set global rules. And we need also our EU friends for our security. And I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine shows how important it is to have strong partners and to have safety in numbers. So having listened to the presentations, I would like to offer 3 important similarities between the EU and East Asia that might be relevant to trilateral cooperative dynamics, but also 3 differences. So based on those, I will try to highlight some experiences that are hopefully relevant for this region. A first similarity between the EU and East Asia is that both regions have a long history that unfortunately has not always been a pleasant one. Europe experienced no less than 2 world wars in the 20th century, and even today a war is raging on the European continent. Similarly, trilateral historical relations between China, Japan, and Korea have a troubled past. In that sense, I can really relate to the historical sensitivities that are involved in trilateral cooperation and trilateral diplomacy. A key difference, however, is that in Europe, the formation of the European Union is the direct result of those 2 world wars that I mentioned. One could say that the European Union was born out of the ashes of the Second World War. And looking at China, Japan, ROK, trilateral cooperation, I'm grateful that the establishment of the Trilateral Summitry and the TCS was not preceded by such a terrible catastrophe immediately prior to its establishment. So the second similarity between the EU and the TCS is the important role of economic and people-to-people cooperation. Indeed, the European Union started out as a common market for coal and steel, and the EU's powers are to this day the strongest in the economic area. The EU has also greatly improved people-to-people contacts, not just by establishing the free movement of people, but also by initiatives such as the Erasmus University Exchange Project. Its benefits to the citizens of Europe in terms of economic prosperity, security, and free movement have fueled the EU's continued development. But here too there's a difference in that the story of the EU integration, strategic interests and politics have always been part of the mix. The goal of the EU is no more war, is itself political. And although it started with a trade community, it was no coincidence that it covered the key strategic industries of the time, coal, steel, and nuclear. The third similarity, and I think all speakers have referred to this, is the importance of institutionalization. That is also the theme of the International Forum, institutionalizing collaboration. I've heard suggestions to annualize the summits, the Leader Summit, to strengthen the function of the TCS, and for it to serve as a confidence and trust-building mechanism. And the EU, I think, proves that to promote integration, common institutions are indeed of key importance. But here is also a key difference. The institutions of the EU have developed over more than 7 decades. They are also treaty-based. Its members have willingly transferred part of their sovereignty to the EU for their common good. That also means that the EU is a legal union. Its functioning and the relations between its member states are governed by the rule of law. And if there are conflicts, they can be resolved by the European Court of Justice. This prevents any one member from dominating the others. Of course, given East Asia's unique history and background, it would be unrealistic to expect a similar level of integration between China, Japan, and Korea. After all, like I said, it took us more than 7 decades in the EU to come this far. Many European experiences may not apply to this region and vice versa. So what then could be relevant EU experiences to the trilateral cooperation between China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea? Let me mention 3. First, as I have just mentioned, and as all speakers have emphasized, institutionalization is key. Whether this is further strengthening the TCS, as Director Zhou mentioned, or the holding of annual leaders meetings, as Director Zhou and Special Advisor Miyake suggested, this creates a culture of dialogue and confidence building, which can contribute to stable and constructive trilateral relations. In the EU, there is a regular schedule for meetings, which means that no country can really cancel meetings if they are dissatisfied with the others. This means that whether relations are on a high or on a low, the meetings happen anyway. This encourages countries to keep talking also when they do not necessarily agree on certain issues. And I think that could be a good example also for trilateral cooperation. It maybe sometimes also means managing expectations. At the EU, when the leaders meet regularly, the expectations are not always high in the sense that we have to have a glowing joint communique, or every summit has to result in earth-shattering results or deliverables. So institutionalize the meetings, make them regular, and make them also quite, a common thing to do. The second suggestion, integration must yield real benefits for people of the countries involved. I think this is rather obvious. And I think that here the TCS is really doing very valuable work. Based on Ambassador Ning's outline of the outcomes of the 9th Trilateral Summit. From this contribution, it seems that Chinese, Japanese, Korean cooperation has a great potential for the inhabitants of all 3 countries, whether this concerns academic exchanges, free trade, scientific and technological cooperation, or cultural exchanges. My final and last point would be, as speakers have also stressed, that in addition to the aforementioned topics, maybe it can be explored also how to discuss more sensitive or political issues. This is not easy, and it does not necessarily happen overnight. But in the context of the EU, it has helped to create a community of partners where any issue of any nature can be placed on its agenda, ensuring structural cooperation on a wide range of issues. Thank you very much.
谢谢大使先生非常准时的完成了。
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas. The EU is comprised of over 30 countries. For our trilateral cooperation, we have just 3 countries participating, and it would not be easy for so many countries to cooperate through this mechanism. And this is certainly a learning that we should get from the EU. The individual situations of the countries are all different, but of course we need to consider those circumstances and also learn from the other regions' experiences. So thank you very much. So now I'd like to go on to the discussion and Q&A session. First of all, yes, again, we continue to receive questions online and also from the floor as well. For our online questions, I'd like to ask our staff to deliver those questions to me. But of course, as a moderator, I have prepared some questions for our speakers and discussants. So let me begin with Director Cho Yang-hyun.
过去25年的合作的历史，当然。
You have gone past the 25 years of trilateral cooperation, and 25 years is quite long. If you were to compare our level of regional integration to the past, do you think we are getting closer to integration, or economic integration in particular? Are we there yet, or are we not, compared to about 10 years ago? What are your thoughts? And also, if we look at the three countries, Korea, China, and Japan, what are each of our competitive strengths for going towards integration? I don't think that we have to speak about something that's too gloomy. So if you can think about some of our competitive advantages, that would be helpful. Thank you for the questions. I would also like to thank Ambassador Vliet. The three proposals that he has made, some of them overlapped with what I suggested, and I do have to say that I agree with your comments. I do think that rather than them being questions, they're more of comments. So thank you for that. Dr. Li Kai-sheng asked me about our level of economic integration and overall integration compared to 10 years ago and what are competitive strengths and advantages. If we look back to 10 years ago, that would be 2014, as I understand. Back then, we didn't have COVID. We didn't have U.S.-China conflict. Of course, there might have been some other challenges, such as a historical, territorial strife and other diplomatic challenges, but the three countries still managed to come together and achieve some measure of progress. In the 2010s and in the 2020s, I think that our challenges were slightly different. The context is different. So in the 2010s, it was really the source of our bilateral tension that made cooperation difficult. But in the 2020s, it was more of the international challenges that made our cooperation more difficult. So there is this challenge that stems from different kind of context. But seen in the long-term view, I think that our trilateral cooperation has indeed become deeper. It has expanded. In the 2020s, there was 4 years of discontinuation of the Trilateral Summit, but if we still look at a broader view, I do think that our level of integration has become deeper. And this is a definite lesson for us to expand our cooperation even further in the future. And also our competitive strengths. This might be a little bit sensitive, but our three countries, in terms of the economy and political and social structures, we are all different. Korea and Japan are free market-based economies. China is not. So there is this difference in our systems. But I think that this difference can be our strength. And our levels of economic growth are also different. In the 1990s, up until then, Japan really was the leader of the economic development model in Northeast Asia. And Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore, those other countries were fast followers. But now if we look at the situation, Korea is also joining the ranks of advanced economies, very similar to Japan. And we've all seen the remarkable growth shown by China. So I think that in the past, we were more mutually complementary, whereas now we can be good peers competing with one another. I think that we have been able to absorb each other's strengths and try to overcome the weaknesses. And in terms of the economy and also people-to-people exchange, we can have further cooperation down the road. That is all. Thank you.
谢谢您的回答。所以从您的回答当中。
Thank you very much for your answer. And I was listening to Mr. Zhou's answer. I was thinking about not just the present exchange, but also future exchange potential. Next, I'd like to give the question to Miyake Kunihiko from Japan. So you've been a diplomat for a long time, and I'm sure that you have a lot of experience and understanding with regards to this issue of cooperation. The Northeast Asian integration, do you feel that there has been progress or it has been regressing? And also, in the future development, what is the biggest area of concern for you? And what is the biggest area of competitiveness for future cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I pessimistic or optimistic? My answer is, of course, I'm optimistic. See, 50 years ago or 70 years ago, we had nothing. Then we started the recovery, and South Korea caught up, and maybe you might have passed us. And China is on the way, and they are catching up, and maybe exceeding us. So given the economic sort of environment in this part of the world as compared to 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's a remarkable achievement. And we have much more in common than before. So from the economic point of view, if not political, from the economic point of view, we have so many things to share. So I am much more optimistic than pessimistic. And then what was the second question? Excuse me. I always do things one by one on one, one at a time.
Okay.
What's the second question?
The second, actually, the second question about you is what's the most worries on the future of this regional cooperation, and what's the advantages of this regional cooperation? Yeah.
Well, there's a trade-off, as I told you before, because in order for us to get together, we have to depoliticize issues. But if you continue depoliticizing issues, we cannot get closer. So this is a trade-off, and this is the advantage, and this is the disadvantage. So what is the most concerning to me? Of course, it is national security, military, or strategic issues. This issue will not go away, no matter how often we get together. And this is the political reality, and let's be honest, we cannot solve it overnight. But at the same time, because there are differences among ourselves, we need to get together again and again and again, so that we continue the confidence building measures. Look, what happened to the United States during the 50s and 60s and 70s, no matter how different they are from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, they always try to continue dialogue with Moscow. Why? Because they wanted to avoid miscalculation, avoid misunderstanding, which could lead to a catastrophe. Therefore, I'm not saying that we are repeating the same Cold War, but given the current circumstances we face now in this part of the world, we need to continue dialogue so that we avoid misunderstanding and miscalculation and get a better understanding of each other.
好，感谢你的回答。那么接下来。
Yes, thank you very much. Another question goes to Ambassador Ning Fukui.
到这个青年。
In your presentation, you talked about the importance of youth exchange. And you said, in fact, that you've personally had the opportunity to attend some of those youth exchange forums that were hosted by TCS. So how do you think we should support the youth exchange going forward? Thank you very much for that very good question. I came here today to the sides and looked around me, and I saw that there are many young people here in the audience, outside of the presenters and the speakers. The fact that there are so many young people here who are interested in trilateral cooperation and that they are trying to understand this better and participate more in these activities is one that is quite encouraging, I have to say. As you have all seen, The joint declaration, the joint Trilateral Summit declaration also placed a lot of emphasis on youth exchange and youth relevant cooperation. In fact, it is emphasized several times, and I was deeply impressed with one expression in particular, and it went something along the lines of the fact that we can make trilateral cooperation more robust by trying to foster more youth exchange, because that will be the foundation for more cooperation down the road. This means that our three heads of state have escalated the level of youth exchange to the next level. They are seeing it as a very important means of furthering trilateral cooperation. This means that we have to likewise escalate our channels of trilateral cooperation, particularly for the youth. And in so doing, what can we do to support more youth exchange? I think that the youth can definitely play a major role. The youth are not only the futures of our three countries, but they are also the future of trilateral cooperation. The youth, the young people of the three countries, are the ones who can shape our collective perceptions of one another. And so because of that, I think that three countries, if we want to further grow and develop, our public perception, our public opinion of one another should continue to improve. And that is where the youth come in. The youth should see themselves and one another in a more positive, more favorable light. And I would like to provide three opinions on how we can further that. The first is to try to have organic, more natural exchange among the youth through the means of tourism or studying abroad, visiting abroad. These are very organic means, and these can be seen as individual level of activities, but more of these can allow us all to have better understanding of one another. So we can see one another in a more objective light and a more realistic light. The second thing is that we have to be more active, more proactive. By that I mean the government should really engage in more proactive measures. The three countries, the three governments, because they are seeing youth exchange and youth cooperation as being very important, the government is very accountable and responsible for furthering these activities. And when I say government, I also include local governments here, provincial governments. And colleges and universities must also see this as an important initiative and spare no funding, providing budgetary support to this initiative. The governments should provide more policy funds in these regards, create platforms for the youth to engage in. Also, exchange platforms may be led by the local governments. Thirdly, that all sectors, all areas should participate. By that I mean the private sector participation. Many representatives from different walks of life who can all bring their own expertise to the table, create a bridge, so to speak, a connection for the youth. I think that the private sector can play a big role in this regard. Again, I have to say that the three countries all come from different systems, different institutions. Our politics are all different. So the three youth of our three countries have grown up in different atmospheres, in different environments. This means that they can be heavily impacted by what they perceive of one another. So the three youths of our three countries are also, therefore, more open to perception, and they can be more malleable to change and understanding, have more mutual respect and mutual understanding of one another by engaging and exchanging with one another even more. and be more objective in analyzing and critiquing the issues that we have between us. And through more exchange, gradually we can have and build more trust and narrow and bridge our differences and contribute to trilateral cooperation.
常赞同您的观点啊。
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ning Fuku, and I fully agree with your opinion. So for the next 25 years, the cooperation will depend on the future generations, the young generation. And we do have many young participants here seated at the back. It's the older generation that are seated in front, but it's nice to meet all of you, the different generations here. Next, I'd like to ask this question to Ambassador Peter van der Vliet. You talked about the EU and the institutionalization. So institutionalization will be very important in regional cooperation. And the EU process of integration probably took a long time, was not an easy process. And after 2 world wars, there has been a lot of progress in institutionalized cooperation. So in trilateral cooperation among Korea, China, and Japan, and also in terms of, we do have the first Secretary General of TCS here with us as well, but for TCS, what is the way by which we can institutionalize cooperation further? How can we contribute to cooperation institutionalization for TCS? And also, in terms of the building stronger capacity for TCS, what are some ways by which we can realize this goal based on EU's experience?
Thank you very much. Well, first I would like to start by saying that I'm already very impressed by how far this trilateral cooperation has actually progressed already. Before, I was so focused on the trilateral summit that was when I arrived August last year in Korea, and it was, you know, is there going to be a trilateral leaders summit or not? So I thought that was pretty much the only thing that was happening in trilateral cooperation. Not so. I mean, Secretary General Lee Sup explained to me that there is multi-layered cooperation already going on and has been going on between the 3 countries. There are more than 70 forms of cooperation. There are 21 ministerial meetings. There are more than 100 projects. I think Professor Zhou in his introduction talked about baby steps. But baby steps are also steps forward. And like I said, at the European Union, it took more than 7 decades to reach the point where we are now. So it's hard for me to exactly answer what is the way forward. That is very much something that has to be discussed between the 3 countries. But I would say small incremental steps. The institutionalization of the cooperation that we all talked about before, multi-layered cooperation along a range of themes. I think the 6 priority areas are very well chosen. So there's a lot of scope for further intensifying cooperation. And also make it the new normal, like I said. Not treat a summit, a leaders summit, as something exceptional, but as the new normal structural cooperation that will just take place every year. So that would be my answer. Thank you.
好，谢谢您的这个，特别是。
Thank you very much for your answer. And yes, we do look forward to those kinds of institutionalization of cooperation among our 3 countries. We will have the Trilateral Summit next year as well, and we hope to have those summits be regularized. We have received some questions through online participants. So there are some questions to the 3 speakers, and they are in English.
Think of the so-called New Cold War era. New Cold War era, in which trilateral cooperation plays a role in the world. 所以关于新冷战时期的看法，那么我们就。
So to our 3 speakers who are 3 experts in this topic, maybe you can try to address this question that we have received online. So we have to finish the session soon. But before we do that, we'd like to hear the answers from our speakers and also try to get some questions from the floor. You have 3 minutes each. Each of the speakers, you have 3 minutes to answer the question about the new Cold War era. So first of all, Mr. Cho Yang-hyun from Korea.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. This expression itself of a new Cold War, I think there is some level of value judgment there, because if we think about the Cold War, that's referring to the U.S. Soviet-Russia tension. And now, in the new Cold War, we think about the, again, bipolar strife between U.S. and China. Oh, there is that image, definitely, when we talk about Cold War or near Cold War. But if we look at the realities, there are definitely some changes, some differences, might be some systemic similarities, but globally, I think that there is definitely a change, and neither U.S. or China want to go back to the past, to the Cold War era. But we have to be mindful of the fact that U.S.-China conflict does impact trilateral cooperation. We have to look at the elements of this bilateral conflict between U.S. and China and not have it impact trilateral cooperation in any meaningfully negative way. And that is our challenge. If we look at maybe this perspective from the point of view of China, they think that U.S. is trying to reshuffle the global world order to place a check on China, to curb China. And then China might try to strategically use a trilateral cooperation as a way to, again, balance out to the U.S. And if that is the reigning perspective, that would be very negative for trilateral cooperation. Or maybe that we can see trilateral cooperation as an antithesis to U.S., Korea, and Japan cooperation. And so this could also something that means we cannot have that together with cooperation, any meaningful cooperation with China. And that would mean that is also a very negative sentiment, a negative evaluation for trilateral cooperation, which is why I would say that our trilateral cooperation, CJK cooperation, is very regional in scope. By that I mean we're transferring some level of national sovereignty to try to create a regional bloc. We're not doing anything that drastic, but that we're doing something of a softer level of regional integration to engage in broader cooperation for the betterment of our region. That is a tradition that we have seen over the past 20 plus years. And in that regard, we have to minimize outside impact to our trilateral CJK cooperation. If you look at our level of cooperation in the past 20 years, now maybe 30 years in the future, they will not always look the same. There will be some ups and downs in the short time. But in the long time, it will continue to broaden and expand. And we need to have that positive mindset, minimize those systemic elements that lead to strife, but try to maximize our economic and integration and cooperation.
回答。那么我想问这个第二位这个。
Thank you very much. Next, from Japan, Miyaki Kunihiko. Our second speaker, I'd like to give you the same question.
My answer is very simple. Whether or not we are in the age of new Cold War or not is irrelevant, completely irrelevant. So some journalists or some academics might want to think that way, but that's not the point. The point is that the situation, the difficulties we face now is much more global than regional. You see, what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in East Asia or Indo-Pacific, they are becoming one. They are not three independent theaters of operation anymore. The so-called revisionist countries are there to change the status quo, unfortunately even by force. So in order for that, for us to cope with the situation, whether it's a new Cold War or not, what is more important is that we are becoming one theater of operation, and we need to be able to deter whatever attempts to change the status quo by force. Not only in this part of the world, but also in Europe, and also in the Middle East. So I'm saying that in order for us to be able to deter or stabilize our part of the world, we need strong NATO to deter the Russians, and we need stable Middle East to deter whatever activities in the Middle East. That's the only way for us to stabilize the entire world. So I repeat that whether or not we are in the new Cold War or not is irrelevant.
谢谢公家报。
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ning. Please go ahead.
但我想，新冷
So if we say new Cold War, neo Cold War, it is not something that is in agreement with global peace or prosperity or even regional peace or prosperity. China has never wanted to have these conflict situations between two blocs. Particularly, we have not tried to antagonize any third party. And this conflict among these different fronts would only lead to more difficulties and challenges for the different countries, only lead to more negativity. And this negativity will also impact trilateral cooperation. CJK cooperation should be free from geopolitical tension. It should not be impacted by ideological fights. The three countries of CJK should only focus on our common growth and prosperity. If in the process of going towards more cooperation, if the CJK countries are going down that path, there could be some concerns down the road. But there could be some concerns that perhaps geopolitical tension might negatively impact us, but our focus should be on our regional growth and development. We have to escape and move away from this neo-Cold War mindset and try to achieve common prosperity. That is our responsibility.
那么在这个
Thank you very much. And now we'd like to open up the floor and accept questions from our audience who are here on site. We do have a lot of young participants, and you're probably itching to ask a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of time, because we have to finish by 12:30. But we do have some opportunity to address maybe one or two questions from the floor. So please raise your hand before asking the question. Please identify yourself briefly before giving the question. And so again, the floor is open, and this is your opportunity to ask questions.
排在那位先生。
Yes, please wait for the microphone, the person on the second line. Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations on the 25th anniversary of the Trilateral Cooperation. I feel that this is a very important session. My question is for Ambassador Peter van der Vliet. So you are presenting a third-party perspective here. And so looking at the European experience before, so in this region, we have Korea, China, and Japan. And there is the US-China conflict that we need to consider. That's going to be very influential. And maybe this could be a new normal in the future. So it's like the white elephant that no one is talking about in this room. So no one has talked about this US-China competition in detail. So, I mean, we're talking about the need to have trilateral cooperation. But when we are faced with very specific challenges like this, I mean, we don't know how we can respond. So with the US, China, and, Korea and Japan are allies, but China does not have that relationship with the US. And so I'd like to know, have there been some discussions about how to respond to such newly emerging challenges? Can we still be very positive about the outlook for the trilateral cooperation despite all of these challenges that comes up, particularly the US-China hegemonic competition? I mean, is this trilateral cooperation going to be possible with the existence of this hegemonic competition between the US and China becoming a new normal?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think the answer depends on whether you want to highlight the differences between countries or the commonalities, and that what binds them. So the answer depends on that. And I think it is no secret that there are differences. There are different interests, and there are different values, even different outlooks on the international order, for example. But I think despite those differences, and I think it was said earlier also during this morning, that countries should embrace the differences and at the same time show respect to one another. And I think, countries can be partners, but they can also be competitors, and they can even be rivals at times. It depends also on the issue. So, and this also goes back to the previous question about this whole new Cold War narrative. I think we should not be sucked into such a mindset. We should acknowledge and embrace the differences and then work from there and see where we can actually meet on certain specific topics. So it's not black or white. And that is also why this is not a new Cold War, because the old Cold War was very much black and white. Two camps and the world was divided. Today's world, today's international relations are much more complex. We can be partners, sometimes we can be competitors or rivals, and we'll just have to work with that and see where we can cooperate. Thank you.
好，谢谢大使的回答。那么还有
Yes, thank you very much. Any other question from the floor? Yes, the gentleman in white, please go ahead.
Please wait, Mark is coming.
大家好，我想尊敬。
Thank you. Hello. I have a question for Ambassador Ning Fukui. I am working in the field of travel cooperation, or specifically tourism cooperation between Korea and China. You have provided some great proposals for TCS and also particularly focusing on youth exchange among the 3 CJK countries. I think that they were great suggestions, and I think that I can also engage in more research and study on those topics that you have presented. The question that I have for you, Ambassador Ning Fukui, is if we want to further expand cultural and tourism and travel tourism among our 3 countries, what can we do as people in the tourism sector to prepare for the future? Yes, that's a very specific question for a particular industry, a very pragmatic and very practical question, I have to say. And I think that you were stumbling upon a very important point, because in this latest summit, when the heads of state were talking about people-to-people exchange, there were clear stipulations that they made and also very clear targets that they have announced. And as someone who is in the field working in the tourism industry, I think that you would be very much interested in this. And you would also want us all to achieve this target early on. And I have to say that I am also rooting for that. I think all three countries want us all to achieve that target that has been set out. And what can people in the tourism industry do to try to support this initiative and try to bring about a better future? In cultural exchange or sports exchange, or maybe exchange among and between college students, or tourism. I think that there needs to be a clear focus on each of these sub-genres. And I think that if we think about the cultural norms and habits and perspectives and the thinking of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, our preferences and our tastes, they continue to evolve depending on the context of the times in science and technology. So even as somebody working in the tourism sector, I think that it will all come down to how clearly stated and clearly defined your focus is, and that focus would also allow you to be very much sensitive to the changes in the preferences of the people that you're hoping to target.
因为时间的关系，我们就开放最后一个问题啊，这个。
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, we are able to entertain one last question. Yes. Since several people have raised their hands, the person on the right, I'm going to give an opportunity for our female participant to ask the question. Good afternoon. I am from an education association. TCS has been held in rotations among the three countries, and it has been hosting a speech contest in which people 18 years old and above can participate in these kinds of speech contests. So do you have any plans to lower the age limit, because we want to encourage the younger students to participate in the speech contests? I speak 3 languages and I am Chinese, but I work in or live in Korea. My children also learn different languages. So I'm hoping that our younger generation, our children, for example, students, can participate in these kinds of events and projects more. So we could maybe open up to the younger generations for the different events. Who are you giving this question to? Maybe the moderator himself can try to answer this question. It will be most appropriate for the Secretary General to answer this question or this proposal. Should I do it, or should the Secretary General answer? I don't think I'm in a position to give a clear answer to that. I can just give proposals and give my wishful thinking, but with regards to lowering the age limit for the participation in the speech contest, I think that will be important, because it would be important for our younger generation to experience a wider world and experience the cultures of different countries from a younger age, because I think this kind of exchanges allows more cultural experiences, also learning not just the languages but also the culture of the partner countries. So I do fully agree with the proposal given by the audience. Maybe the Secretary General or anyone from the TCS Secretary can give an answer to that. But again, we should give more opportunities for the younger generation to participate. That will be a very good proposal. Thank you very much for that idea. And we have only 1 minute remaining in our session, so we will have to close. Through our discussion in this session, there were some important implications that we were able to derive. Our speakers, our discussant, and our audience all talk about one commonality, which is institutionalization. So we need to ensure that trilateral cooperation should be institutionalized. And secondly, we need to have independent identities developed for our region. And there was also a question about the new Cold War. But regardless of what happens in the international community, we have to have a clear idea that we are a sovereign region. We have our own interests that we need to pursue together through trilateral cooperation. But of course, there may be some differences and difference in perspectives. However, we need to be willing to be inclusive of that, to accept that. We need to respect the different cultures also. But at the same time, we need to have a practical approach. So we need to have regular trilateral summits, for example, to ensure that there is continuous development in our relationships. And of course, for continuous development, we need to deal with the more sensitive political agenda as well. So there were 6 priority areas mentioned during the summit, for example, tourism and youth exchanges and others. So I'm sure all of you would agree that these are all important areas that needs continuous development. Once again, thank you very much to our speakers and discussant and our audience.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, and all the panelists for bringing us an excellent session with in-depth presentations and discussions. This concludes the first session.